Welcome to the Resistance broadcast, everybody. I'm John. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is a glorious day for Star Wars fans because it is the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back being released way back in 1980. And we are going to spend this whole episode dedicated to episode 5 of the Star Wars saga, which at one point was called Part 2, I guess. But we'll get into that later. With me, as always, James and Lacey, and we are joined by a former Lucasfilm creative executive. He is a writer and author. His upcoming novel about the space race called All Up is available for pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and will be released on July 14th. He's known for writing the making of Star Wars books, including our topic today, The Empire Strikes Back. And you may also know him for revealing George Lucas didn't like Mara Jade with us last year on the podcast. Welcome back to the Resistance broadcast, J.W. Rinzler. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yay.
I'm somehow this seems like the only way to talk now. So it's even, more welcome than last time in a odd way.
We appreciate you coming back. It's been about a little over a year since you were with us last time, and it certainly feels oddly more normal now to be doing this sort of thing than back then. I'm sure for you too.
Yeah.
But yeah, before we get into Star Wars and mainly really The Empire Strikes Back, as I mentioned, your book All Up. Why don't you just take a few moments and let us know what that's about, how it came about, where people can get it, and whatever you want to do about it.
I'll keep it short. So All Up is not. It's about the space race, but it's also about the whole first space age. It really starts actually before World War II and then takes you all the way through World War II and all the amazing and very strange things that were going on at that time with the development of rocketry and the V2 rocket and MI6 trying to figure out what Nazi Germany is doing. And there's a lot of, it's based, it's a historical fiction thriller. It's based on something like 80% verifiable facts, but it also brings in things that you can't really verify 100%, but which are there's quite a lot of proof for, Foo Fighters and UFOs and the Battle of Los Angeles and how that was or was not related to the central story. And then it goes through the space race and up to the Apollo 11 mission and the landing on the moon. And so the reason why I did it is I started doing research when I was taking the bus basically back and forth to Lucasfilm. I had time to kill, and I just started doing a lot of research and realized that not only did I not know much about it, but all the people I was talking to at work, the people who knew a lot about this stuff actually did not really know that much stuff about it. They knew about the technical side, they knew about Apollo 11, but they didn't know just, anything. No, for instance, if I say Sergei Pavlovich, but I'm mispronouncing it, so nobody knows what I'm talking about. But Korolev. But even if I were pronouncing it correctly, nobody would know who I was talking about. But he was the Russian principal designer behind Sputnik and the first man in space. And,
okay.
And it's an unbelievable story, perhaps the most exciting story, true adventure story of the 20th century. And it just seemed like it was time to go behind the scenes. For me, it was like another behind the scenes book, instead of writing about Star Wars or Indiana Jones or whatever, I could write about something that really happened. I mean, the other stuff really happened, but as a novel, so I could introduce things that are not verifiable and also get into people's heads.
Sure.
So it was a lot of fun.
Man, that sounds so cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah, I hope people will like it.
Let me then ask you real quick, do you think that Star Wars was the thing that put you on this path of like space storytelling?
It certainly didn't hurt. What triggered, I'm old enough to have seen them walk on the moon. Like my parents woke me up and I was there.
Do you remember it like vividly?
Yeah, vividly. It was not something
wow.
that I was 7 or almost 7. And I understood what was going on. And then after whatever celebration it was for episode 3, I drove around with my family. We went to Huntsville and I went to the Space Museum there, which actually Wernher von Braun started. And there's this Saturn V on its side. If you haven't been there, if you live anywhere near Huntsville, Alabama, it's really worth the trip to go see it. It's an incredible museum. And then in the bookstore were all these bookstores with a few books showing basically, here's the guys who built a Saturn V, and it was all these Germans in Nazi uniforms, or German army, and a few in Nazi uniforms. I was only vaguely aware of Operation Paperclip and all of that, and so then I thought about it for many years, and it took many years to write, and it took many versions of drafts because I'd never done something like this. So I have to say it was a learning process.
Wow. So when you got to the final draft, was it very difficult to let it go because you had been working on it so long?
The original book was much longer. I did so much work I didn't have to do. But as they say, you have to learn how to drown your babies. So I had to take all sorts of stuff out of the book, which was not easy, and reduce it to a size that anybody would even consider publishing.
And then you just released the director's cut in a blog somewhere or whatever.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, maybe one day. I don't know. It might not be such a good idea. It's still around 600.
Hey, those parts got cut.
600 pages?
It's still 600 pages.
Wow.
Good
luck to the audiobook guy. Are you going to do your own audiobook?
I think the publisher. No, I mean, I hope not. I think the publisher is evaluating whether they want to do an audiobook or not. I hope
that's cool.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So July 14th, and it's available for pre-order, as I said. And where I saw on your website, it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I don't know if there's other places too, but go check it out. If you know JW's writing, obviously it's of that quality, so give that a look. But now, 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. Your book for this came out at the 30th anniversary, right?
Yes, in 2010. Yeah.
So happy 10-year anniversary to your book.
Yeah. Hey. Oh, that's right. I didn't even think about that. Yes, 10th anniversary. All right. I'm going to tweet about it one day.
Yeah, there you go. So I guess to get the ball rolling about this, I'd finally gotten my copy, and I love it so much because it really is just a permanent stamp on how things were. And I think that's so important as time goes on, just like you were saying about your other book and the history of the space race and the engineering, and nobody knows that stuff. And as more time passes, you just remember the headlines and the clippings and that sort of stuff. But so to kick things off here, when George first came up with the idea to make his sequel for Star Wars, as I understand it, the second part was going to be to conclude it, right? So he was essentially going to use the second version to conclude his saga, and it was trademarked as Part 2 initially.
I don't know. That I actually don't. I didn't come across anything that said he was going to try and conclude it.
Okay.
That it could be. I'm not saying it's not true, but I didn't come across any information about that. What I did come across in the old interviews was, and I published it in an issue of Star Wars Insider, was George's talk with it's been a while, Alan Dean Foster, right, who wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye,
right.
When they were discussing what became that book, George was talking about it as being, and he will not agree with this, and so it may not have been fixed in his mind. But the interview, if you read it in Star Wars Insider, he's talking about this novel as if that story will be the sequel. Now, if that story, as they were talking about it, was going to wrap it up, that's possible, but I don't think so, because I definitely remember him saying he wanted to do it like James Bond. He wanted to do a movie every year, which is finally now what's happening.
Right.
Which is very ironic.
Right.
In many, many ways. And I remember when I did the Star Wars Insider article, afterwards there was George was getting an award given out by the San Francisco Museum or something or other. And he invited me to come to a talk there. And afterwards he said, that Insider article is wrong. I said, oh, it's wrong. And I said, well, if it's wrong, well, tell me what's right and we'll print it. And he said, oh, no, it's okay. Like, in some ways, a kind of typical George conversation.
Do you feel like it depends on the decade you get an interview from George Lucas? Like, if you got a table of 5 people and it's all George Lucas from each decade, would they argue with each other?
Definitely. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And also, I mean, I don't mean to in any way diminish him, but, you know, like a lot of people who are very creative, his ideas change. Mm-hmm. And once and also because he's somebody who has to really fight and has had to fight to get his ideas made into movies or whatever, even building Skywalker Ranch. Once he latches onto the new idea, that's the only idea that exists.
Sure. Okay.
And one solid example of that is when I was on the set of episode 3, he was saying how you could move the movies around and they tell different stories. You can tell them 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, or whatever order you want. And he really liked that idea. And that's in the episode 3 book. Right. Definitely said it. He approved it. Years later, fast forward to when we're looking to do specials for some Blu-ray release or something, I said, why don't we do something about how you can tell different stories depending on which, and Lynn Hale said, that's a great idea. Let's do that. We were all very excited about it. And I sent a memo to George, or actually, no, I sent a memo to George, or she did. I can't remember who. But anyway, and he wrote back saying, no, there's only one way to watch them. 1 through 6. That's it. The only way. And we were all disappointed.
What? 1 through 6, he said.
That was this was roughly 2014 that he said that.
Oh, okay.
I love that there's 2014
it's just interesting
George
how
versus
yeah. I would like to see, you know, different versions of what he thinks is like the order to watch it in, you know what I mean? Like the machete order and the other versions and other things like that. Like George Lucas's I assume at this point it would be chronological, right?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. It's 1 through 6. And I've said this many times, and I probably bored you with it last time, so stop me. You guys can edit it out. But I see the Star Wars movies as 3 different stories, right? There's Star Wars, which is the end of a prequel. I said this, right?
Yeah, but say it again because I love you saying this. So yes.
I don't have to say it.
We want you to go.
No, all right, so it's the end of the Leaving Home trilogy, which is THX, American Graffiti, Star Wars. It's all about leaving home. The next is a 2-part story about sons and fathers or whatever it is, Empire and Jedi. Mm-hmm. And then you have a 3-part story about how does a good kid become bad and how does a sort of stagnant democracy become a dictatorship. And the characters don't really line up from story to story. They don't. And Darth Vader doesn't even line up between 6 and 5.
Right.
He doesn't, you know, and it's very hard to do those movies. And it's sort of an idiosyncratic aspect of Star Wars, which I think in some odd way makes them even more interesting.
So I'm going to throw 2 names at you. And if they didn't pass away when they did, tell me, in your opinion, with the research you did, how marginally different between each person's contributions or what their contributions would have been, how different would Empire have been? So John Barry and Lee Brackett.
Well, John Barry is a little bit complex because, you know, he wanted to go off and direct his own movie, because he wanted to be a director. Mm-hmm. And George is, I think, very disappointed that he didn't want to come back as production designer.
Right.
But when John Barry's movie fell apart and he was fired by Kirk Douglas, he came in as second unit director. And I think George was really happy. And he shot for a few days or a week, I can't remember, in the hangar on Hoth. And then he died. You know, he went home from the set and died, I forget how long later, but not long later, a few days.
Meningitis, right?
Something like that. I don't remember. So if John Barry had been the production designer from the beginning, the sets would certainly, and Norman Reynolds is a great production designer, but they're 2 different kinds of artists. And so it probably would have looked slightly different.
Right.
Right.
And John Barry, I mean, George is a very critical guy, and John Barry is one of the few people who was just unconditionally positive about and described him as a genius several times. And he was the guy, George had never made a soundstage movie. And John Barry and Roger Christian in the art department are the ones who helped him through it while George feuded with the camera department. And Lee Brackett is her influence. If she hadn't died, I mean, that's hard to say. Whether he would have had her do the second draft, it's hard. I don't know. She was a great writer. It seems like it's hard to say because she was dying as she wrote her draft. And he just, as I described in the book, he would write no in big, by like page 18, he was just writing no.
Yeah.
And that means he was really upset.
Yeah. So is it the size of the font that he used is how?
Yeah. Started out with, he was making small notes, and then by whatever it was, 17 or 18, it was just no. and so George is a pretty loyal guy, and he respected her work. Mm-hmm. So it's possible he could have said, okay, let's try again, and this is what I want, and it would have worked out. But I just don't know. Okay. It says "I know" on your T-shirt. Maybe you know, but
I don't know. But just from your book, and then I guess we can all kind of bounce this around a bit. Just like your segments of Lee Brackett's first draft, Yoda was called Minch, and it was more of a troll-looking character. Vader thought he killed Luke Skywalker on Hoth, and kind of confirmed that he killed him. In his mind, he thought he got him. Lando was a clone. Which maybe is an idea George brought back for the prequels. Luke was in love with Leia, and Vader kind of used that against him in a way. But the Emperor seemed the same. Like the Emperor seemed like they knew exactly what they wanted out of the Emperor out of the gate. So, can you like kind of comment on those bits and what you may have learned from that aspect of the story that early on? Because especially you, having worked on your current novel, how things changed so much. It's amazing that those types of things were in the first draft for this.
Right. Unfortunately, he must have had many talks with her before she went off and wrote. And I haven't seen, that story conference notes. Later, there's notes with Kasdan, Kirshner, and Lucas. So we know what they said more or less. But I don't know what they were talking about. You can assume that a lot of those ideas, if not most of them, were George's about what the relationships were and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't see how she could, otherwise she would have gotten up to speed that quickly.
Okay.
But the style of the writing just wasn't in that kind of serial kind of Star Wars, and with the humor that George had created, and she just wasn't getting it, and she was really ill. But I think like it does prove again that, George was very busy and doing all sorts of things, and the relationships between the characters were not fixed. They were always, I always described it as a kaleidoscope, because
always in motion, the characters.
Exactly. In the very first, in the rough draft, Anakin Starkiller's father is, as you guys know, is Kane Starkiller, and he is half man, half machine.
Right.
And then that idea is just sort of doesn't appear again until he decides to make Darth Vader Luke's father. But in George's mind, he sort of always was the father figure. Yeah. But while he was making Star Wars, clearly he's not.
Right.
So
sure.
Yeah, so those things were just, as you say, constantly in motion.
Wow.
This kind of brings up another question that I had written down for you. We talked about, Lando being a clone was like somewhere in the notes. Like, in your opinion, what's something in the story that was historically almost the final product, and then just like at the last minute they swerved, and what a crazy change that would have been?
Offhand, I just can't think of anything. I'm sure there's something. I have the book right here. I could go through it, but you probably don't want to see me going through my book trying to remember it.
This is a 5-hour podcast. Yes.
Speaking of the book, John said this the other day, and I have to agree completely because I got mine a couple weeks ago, and it is just majestic. It is gigantic. It's heavy. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful piece of history. So knowing that you did all that research, you had all these conversations, and you got to see all these different documents and stuff, is there anything when you look at the book that you immediately think of that you're like, I can't believe I found that, or I can't believe I heard that conversation? That is just something really cool to you?
Well, two things, Tony. When I look at the book, I always think this book could have been a lot better.
Come on. Don't say that.
Seriously, I'm really serious, because the first book, we had a designer. I gave them the pictures. They designed the books, and I moved things around. And I helped them plan the pages. And it was very frustrating, because you're kind of pushing somebody else to do something. In between, I worked with John Knoll in a book, and he showed me how to lay out to do a book map. So I did a book map for Empire, and that's basically what was published, is my book map. Nobody went in and then designed the book, making it look better. That's really, there's almost no design in that book. And so then on Return of the Jedi, we finally got it right, where I did a book map, and then a really good designer went in and made it look like a beautifully designed book. I actually, it's okay, but it could have been a lot better. And if they ever,
I think it's a beautiful book, but yes, I can understand that, as if it's your project, you're like, oh, I could have done this.
Yeah, there was a misunderstanding between me and the publisher, and anyway. And I kept waiting for the book to be designed, and then it was published.
Right. It happens.
But the other thing is, the thing that I just can't believe is that when I was working on, and that's in the intro, and I've probably told this story already, but it's the anniversary, so we'll tell it again.
Yeah.
I was working on Star Wars. I was working on some book. I think I was working on the Indiana Jones book.
You've done too many books. They're all blending together.
And Don Bees was in the archives with me. I don't know why he was there. And he used to be the archivist. This is at Skywalker Ranch. And he said, I hear you're going to do Empire. You know, when I was the archivist, I found all these cassette tapes in the garbage. They were about to throw them out, and they're the original Alan Arnold tapes. Would you be interested in using them? I mean, I said, are you joking? And he had them in his closet for, I don't know, 15 years or something, or 20 years. I don't know how long. It says in the book, I think. And these were the original. There were no copies. These were the original Alan Arnold tapes that he did for Once Upon a Galaxy. And he only used at the most 10% of what he recorded. And there you could hear Kirshner and Anthony Daniels and I forget who else in the cafeteria at L Street talking. And I used some of those in the enhanced ebook versions. But we could have put in 10 times the amount of audio and video. Well, I don't know about video, but audio definitely, because there was a lot of interesting stuff.
And was it a lot of candid conversations? Like, did they know they're? Oh, okay.
They knew they were being recorded, but they didn't care. Lucasfilm had 100% control over the tapes.
Sure.
And that's where I got the, sort of the extended version of the thing that led up to I Know, with Harrison Ford and Kirshner and but on the tape, it's very interesting because you can hear them. The conversation starts out on the set, then it moves in over here, then moves into the dressing room, and then Carrie Fisher shows up, and she's very upset about something which I don't remember. And but you really can hear Kirshner kind of taking control of the situation, and also doing what a director does, which is slightly manipulating his actors to get the performances and get everybody on the same page. And it's fascinating because he was a very there's in some quarters there are actors who really didn't like working with Kirshner, but that wasn't the case on The Empire Strikes Back. They all really loved working with him.
Okay.
Right.
Because that story, it seems to have its own folklore to it, that scene. And did Harrison Ford just come up with that on the spot? Is that true? Like Kirshner almost in The Empire of Dreams seemed to make it seem that way, where he said, just clear your mind and let's just roll, let's just do it. And that just came out.
No, it's not the case. It's
right. But he paints it in that romantic way.
Right. Well, also that's the huge advantage of doing a book over a video piece.
Mm-hmm.
Video pieces have to be very short sentences and lots of visual sides. And you can do lots of really cool things in the video side and the visual side. But the book, you have the time to tell a whole story,
right?
Which you just don't in a video.
Right.
So for the audience, what's the true story as you understand it of that iconic scene and how it came to be?
Well, I'd have to go back and read the book, but what I remember is just what I said is that they didn't. I think they thought it could be better than as it was written, and there was a lot of changing. That the whole sort of freezing chamber went through a lot of different versions and iterations, as did their fight, and they were just. It was one of the reasons why the movie was going kind of slowly was that. George's movies are all this way, and so are most movies. There are hardly any movies where they say, "Okay, we really know what we're going to shoot. We shoot it." They go to the editing room, and this all cuts together perfectly. Done. It's always a real struggle,
right?
90% of the time. So they were just saying, this can be better. Let's change it. Just like they invented the whole. We're going to blow up the Rebel base in Star Wars, which was not in the script, as you guys know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of the script, so the second draft George took over and wrote because Lee Brackett passed away, and he was in your book. He was reluctant to do it because, as Kirshner said in your book, George Lucas hated writing. He didn't like doing it.
Right.
So he was like racking his brain on finding someone to write for it, and then he eventually did it. But then in your book, it says that George he actually found it to be an enjoyable experience. And now, of course, he brought in Kazan eventually. But do you feel like that was a turning point for George to eventually see himself penning all three scripts for the prequels? Like, did that experience change everything for him?
Well, I think I don't know about enjoy. He never said that he liked writing. He never. And later, like my last interview with him, he described how much he hated most of the process of making a movie. But that was the mood he was in that day. That day, he even said he didn't enjoy editing, and I don't believe that. He was just feeling grouchy or something. I think he realized after working with Brackett that he was going to need to write at least the first draft of of the stories, and then he needed to bring in somebody to do the polish, and that's what he did with the hikes on the first one and Lawrence Kasdan on the second and the third. They did polishes, and the problem with the prequel trilogy is he never found somebody to do the polishes.
Why didn't Kasdan get involved in the prequel trilogy?
It's kind of like you and your book layout.
Yeah, you need somebody who's good at doing the stuff that you can't do.
Right.
Which is it's like it's almost like a good editor to do that thing. And I don't know what happened on the prequels. I only know for episode 3. I remember they were trying to find somebody and they just couldn't. Rick McCallum could tell you more.
Sure. Right. 'Cause
let's get him on.
Yeah. Okay. The next thing I want to get into is, and I'm the biggest Empire fan of the three of us. That's why I'm just like kind of.
We're letting him have my
moments here. So there's a big moment when Luke leaves Dagobah and Obi-Wan, and you had the screenshots of the scripts there from Lee Brackett's and George crossing things out and changing words, where Kenobi says that boy's our only hope, and Yoda says, no, there is another in the final version, but in the early scripts it was no, we must find another, and George changed it to no, we must search for another. So clearly this whole myth that George had all this figured out and that they were twins and he knew it and all that stuff is obviously not accurate. When it comes to The Empire Strikes Back and making this movie, how much did George have put together? Was it just that he wanted to make Darth Vader Luke's father and that's it? Like Leia was not even part of the deal, right? That was still a potential three-way romance.
Right. That was clearly, to me anyway, this is just my opinion, and based on the research that as I've studied it, is that there was a three-way romance going on in Empire. They were not brother and sister yet. And although, again, if George came on your show and argued it, he'd say, well, look at this early draft where Leia was Luke's cousin. Because there was in the second draft or something of the Star Wars, she was his cousin. So again, just like the father thing, there was a precedent. But then in Empire, it was more interesting to have it be a love triangle, much more interesting. But then when Jedi came around, and in the Jedi book, I wrote it. I mean, I didn't write it. I found the part where George wrote it. He writes Leia ! And I'm 99% sure that was the moment where George decided, okay, Leia is his sister and she's the missing, she's the other.
Wow. Okay. That's kind of crazy to me because people are so the revisionist history, and George, I guess, maybe it's a little bit of his own fault that he kind of paints it that way, that he had this grand design. And if you just look at the history and, your books and, historical facts of how these movies were made, it was pretty piecework until he had the prequels, which is obviously designed out and fitting up until.
Well, and also you got to know the way George is. A key part of all of this, the key part, is George Lucas's personality, his idiosyncrasies. He doesn't want to have it planned out. He does not want to have it planned out. It's boring to know exactly what you're going to do. There has to be excitement in the creation.
Right.
He didn't want the artists to do really advanced storyboards, although clearly there was a lot of storyboarding going on in the first three. But as the tools got more powerful in terms of filmmaking, there was less and less storyboarding going on, although there was a lot more animatics. But then he had control over it. He didn't want other people designing his shots for him, because he knew that once you brought storyboards to a set, then you were kind of beholden to those storyboards.
Right.
And so he wanted to be able to spontaneously change things on the fly. That's exciting. And to be able to change things in editorial like they did in Star Wars. And, how he was able to, in Jedi, basically change so much of the whole three-way giant battle at the end, and to be able to create something. And so I think that's the way he likes to work. He likes to wrong foot people so they don't even know sometimes what's happening.
Really?
Sure. It's not like he's diabolical, but it's like there has to be a kind of spontaneity in it for him. That's my take. And I don't think he would enjoy knowing exactly what was going on. Although, if you interviewed him, he might say that he did know everything was going on, and he really does like. I mean, he could completely contradict everything that I've said. And and in his defense, he did. And I think I mentioned this last time too. But he once told me that he had a really big, like, giant book or series of notebooks or whatever, where he has all his most intimate ideas about Star Wars and his writings. And I said, well, can I see it? And he said, no. And so maybe in that book, all this stuff is spelled out way in advance. I don't know. I keep looking at your t-shirt, which says, and it's very disconcerting.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Man, I'm really digging this. It's making me think about, his approach to the prequels. Is this personality, this part of George that just kind of wants to take it on the fly? Do you think that helped navigate his process when he was like, well, let's do episode 1, then 2, then 3, as opposed to being like, let me just get it all done and then we'll start production on episode 1? Like, he was writing 2 and 3 after.
Yeah, I think
he had already done.
Right.
One,
And I haven't written books about 1 and 2, so I don't know. I imagine for that one, he might have had more of it, somewhat detailed outline, because he knew he was going to make 3. Because the first one, right, he had no idea if he was ever going to make a second one. For Empire, yes. But for the prequels, he knew he was going to get through all 3.
Sure.
But at the same time, I do think that he was perfectly willing to change things in 2 if he got better ideas after making episode 1.
I mean,
it intrigues me simply because, like, and I know this is an Empire Strikes Back episode, but it just makes me wonder what George's view on, hey, we're getting ready to do 7, 8, and 9. Do we write the whole story 7, 8, and 9 and then do the movies, or do we just play it by the ear? What his opinion on that would be, because it seems like nowadays people think they should have done that, but that's always been George Lucas's personality. It seems like he loves to change things on the fly, and he loves to not know the direction of things, and he wants to be able to kind of, on the deadline, change something to make sure that that's the perfect route they want to go. That's cool, man.
Yeah, he once described, I mean, this was just in terms of creating Yoda. He wrote the Yoda character, and they had no idea how they were going to do the Yoda character. And I said, well, what were we going to do if it was a disaster? And he said, well, I was working with Jim Henson. He said, I jump out of an airplane, but I always have a parachute. So it's a calculated risk. He knows he's playing with fire, but he has certain, aces in his hand.
He has a plan B, C, D.
Yeah. And so for 7, 8, 9, he had a plan for 7, and then less of a plan for 8, and less of a plan for 9. But he definitely gave Disney an outline, which they ignored.
Right, and he made clear that they ignored.
Yeah, that's not a revelation.
I wonder, do you feel like, and I want to get back to Empire, obviously, do you feel like he, I don't know if you had spoken to him about this, but that famous interview where he said Disney, the white slavers and all that stuff, do you feel like he regretted that interview, like entirely?
That only he could say. I know I was still at Lucasfilm at that time, and it was shortly before I was supposed to interview him for the book, the Force Awakens book. Mm-hmm. He was all set to write about that. He was enthusiastic. And after that, they came down very hard on him, and he canceled the interview. I think that was it for him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I think clearly he did not enjoy being, slapped down or whatever, being reprimanded by.
He's a rebel.
Yeah. And he says things off the cuff, and it was a, completely different mindset, completely different process for how they're making the movies now. It had to change, but it's apples and oranges.
Right.
It's interesting though, because the way you described George doing Empire seems very similar to the way that JJ did Rise of Skywalker, only because he did a lot of things on the fly too. Like he changed stuff day of, they'd rewrite the script, they'd do different shots and scenes and stuff like that. They probably had a more of a written outline than what you're saying with George, but it's interesting to hear that JJ, who's openly said that George is an influence to who he is and what he's done in his life, has picked up on that kind of like spontaneity. So that's kind of cool.
Well, right. And like I say, most movies, a lot of movies are made that way. I mean, Clint Eastwood is an exception. Clint Eastwood shoots what's on the page.
Right.
And he goes very fast. But Stanley Kubrick would spend, didn't even care. He'd shoot for a year till he completed the movie. That's sort of the other extreme. So yeah, George is certainly not the only one. But the difference is that when George, and that maybe, I don't know about JJ and Disney because I'm not there. But when George decided,
I'm saying more he's pulling inspiration from George more than anything else.
Right. But when George, at least, well, as it turned out for all 6 films, when he did decide something, there was nobody saying, "Oh, you sure that's a good idea?"
Oh, right.
There was nobody else. There was nobody looking over his shoulder.
Right. That's true.
That makes sense.
The buck always stopped with him, which I think one of my favorite parts from your book that blew my mind, and I didn't know about until I read your book, So that Empire came out and George Lucas ordered more shots to be added to the movie for its wide release. And he had them create 3 new shots for the very end of the movie.
Right.
Because he felt the end of the movie didn't make sense and would leave people confused. Can you touch on that at all? And like, did you talk to George about this to learn more about it? Because that blows my mind. I've heard of people saying like, we worked on that movie up until 3 days before it came out. The movie came out. Yeah. And he had 3 shots redone or new shots added, and he made storyboards and had them do these 3 new shots to add for the wide release. Can you talk about that? That's crazy.
You kind of described it. That's what happened. He decided.
Okay, I don't know if you had more conversations with him about it or anything of that nature that you could shed more light on. It's just so fascinating.
I don't remember. I did. I think I asked about it. Again, I'd have to look it up in the book, and it's going to be boring. But I definitely asked Joe Johnston about it too. Mm-hmm. And he said, I thought the movie was done. And he was down in southern Los Angeles relaxing, and suddenly he got this call. And it wasn't from George. It was from, I think it was the ILM general manager. It said, we need 3 more shots. You've got till tomorrow or something to design them. Whatever it says in the book. And you can see the coffee circle stain of his coffee thing on one of the storyboards because he was pulling an all-nighter or something. And he just, George could do that by that point. It was, the biggest grossing movie of all time. And he wanted to make sure the wide release made sense.
Because that, I don't know, there's so many aspects of that I like because it makes me think of like prequel era George is not really that different from original trilogy era George, where he's or special edition George, where he's just constantly wanting to make changes. He literally added to his movie after it came out.
I love that phrase. I thought the movie was done. It's like, it's, arguably it's still not done, right? We don't know that there's not going to be future changes. It's crazy.
I can see I see the drawings now here, and I can see the coffee stain. It was Tom Smith, I think, who called Joe Johnston, and he says George has gone to see the movie with an audience and realized the end of the movie was unclear. So, that's what happens when you're stuck in an editorial for a long time. It seems like everybody's seen it so many times that it all makes sense to you. Mm-hmm. And then, when an audience sees it, it's like, oh my God, did you know this movie was about, something that we never thought it was about? What he's saying.
Yeah. I picture George like asking people as they walked out, like, what did you think? Like he's like right there, like he's in the theater. Like I can almost see like a comedy flick of him sitting in the theater and being like, people kind of laugh and he's like looking over his shoulders and stuff. He's like trying to like feel out what everybody's doing. And it kind of reminds me of the Room movie that they made. What's it called?
Oh, it was based on that movie, The Room. The worst.
With Tommy Wiseau.
But it has, but it has James Franco and his brother. Yeah, it's like I almost want to see this movie it's like a comedy, but it's kind of like a historical. This is how it happened of George. Yeah. And is in this production, man. I love listening to your stories, man. This is awesome. Well, great.
I'm sure just like they've made, I don't know how many movies they've made about the Beatles now. I mean, not documentaries, but like live action.
Oh,
movies.
Yeah.
Somebody will eventually make a live action movie about the creation of Star Wars.
Will George will George have to sanction that since it'd be about him, or is it all?
That's a legal question. I don't think so. I think you can do it without their sanction. I'm not sure.
Who would play George Lucas if they made it today?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not a casting director. Offhand, I don't know. I don't know who the young people are.
Richard Dreyfuss?
Well, in the old days, he could have.
No, play like... Yeah, true. Yeah. Oh, wow. So, I want to ask you then about George Lucas in that way. Was he like... Because that sounds like him, the perfectionist, but it also sounds like him not insecure, but he wants people to like his product. So what was the balance there? Did he want to change Empire because he wanted to make sure people liked it, or did he want to change it because it was appeasing to him to fix it and add that stuff?
No, because he wants people to understand it.
Okay.
He wants people to be able to follow the story. That's a key thing about George. And I saw a lot of that while I would sit with him in animatics during episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
He is a real stickler for in action scenes that all the action makes sense. And also it's not just people punching each other for the sake of punching each other or just flailing away with lightsabers for 10 minutes with nothing really happening. Like a lot of fight scenes are today. It's like, where is the emotional content? So he was very concerned about emotional content, but he was also very concerned that it all made sense logistically, geographically for the audience. So if the audience doesn't know where Leia and Luke are in relation to the Falcon flying off to go get Han Solo, hopefully, that's a big problem in storytelling.
Right.
So he was a very, very, is a great storyteller. That's what it comes down to. He just wants to tell the story. Well, although I disagree with some of the changes he made in A New Hope. I don't think you need the Han Solo Jabba the Hutt scene because they covered it.
It's still rough, yeah.
It just slows down the movie, and they already covered that in the dialogue in the cantina.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But by that time, he decided he was going to do it, and there was nobody going to stop him.
Wait, you didn't like the Ronto covering the entire frame and walking in front of the camera?
No, to me, Star Wars is Star Wars. It's the version it was when it came out, period.
Yeah.
And I understand. It's his movie. He can do whatever the hell he wants.
Right.
But, he's the genius who created them. But personally, if I'm going to watch it, I'm going to watch the early version.
Yeah. That's fair. So with Empire and like the Dagobah stuff, there's a lot there. It's a big chunk of the movie. We all know the story about how it was, was it going to happen? Was it not going to happen with the puppets with Jim Henson? But in your book, it kind of, at least to me, it seems like George got more involved than he thought he was going to need to get involved with the movie. Did he butt heads at all with Kirshner? Did they have any issues, and did George try to take control at all? Was there anything like that? And what was George's overall involvement with the production for Empire as opposed to
it was evolving, right? I think George had tremendous respect for Kirshner, and he was older and had a lot of experience and had worked with a lot of huge stars and had made a number of successful films and had given seminars at USC and that sort of thing. But what happened was George wanted to step back. He didn't want to go to England, I imagine. And he wanted Gary Kurtz to produce the movie and Kirshner to direct it. And he would just cut it together in the editing room and have some, not have to deal with all the, whenever I mentioned some other movie or something, I say, George, wasn't that a difficult situation? He'd always say, for God's sakes, I did Star Wars. Star Wars was for him the most difficult thing he ever did. And it can't be underestimated in terms of making a movie, how hard it was to make that movie. He took basically several industries that had died and revived them single-handedly. It's such an amazing accomplishment. It just changed movies forever. So Empire, he just wanted to relax a little bit. And they went over there, Gary Kurtz, and Gary Kurtz didn't have the same idea of what producing that movie was as George's idea was, which was to stick to the budget because it was George's money.
Right. Oh,
Gary Kurtz. And I talked to Gary Kurtz for the book. And he said, we knew it was going to make its money back. What difference did it make if it cost a few $1 million more? It's basically what he said. I'm paraphrasing. And
sure.
George's idea was, and which is very legitimate, is that those were my $1 million. That's not a studio. And George it went so far over budget that George had to put his company on the line. It was on the chopping block. The bank pulled out. They had to find a bank of Boston instead. It was hugely embarrassing for George. So he was, and it's in the book, Howard Kazanjian is pulled on at the end to finish producing Empire. And Gary Kurtz was also, there was kind of two producers in a way. How that worked is probably a subject for another book. But then, Kirshner, the director's job is to direct the movie as how he sees fit. And the producer is supposed to keep everything going and on budget. So Kirshner was doing his job. So George didn't, I think, blame Kirshner in any way. But what he realized was he was going to have to go over there and put everything back on track. And he did.
Oh, okay.
And that's when they cut down the number of scenes on Dagobah. They cut down on the Yoda puppet. He said, and Kirshner understood, it's like, I'm over budget. This is my money. I'm not sure exactly what the conversation was. I don't know. But Kirshner they didn't butt heads. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing now. And I'm pretty sure Kirshner was relatively fine with it. Or he would have left. I mean, he could have, I suppose.
Right.
But I don't think it was anything like that. The person who did end up leaving, of course, was Gary Kurtz.
Right. Why did he leave?
Because of the budget.
Okay. It's funny you said that. Like you painting that picture of George like showing up to keep them back on schedule reminds me of George Lucas was Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, showing up on Death Star 2 saying, I'm here to keep you back on schedule, pretty much, for The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, except that as far as I know, he didn't strangle anybody to death.
He didn't choke anybody. As far as you know, right? All right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. He was the responsible artist.
Right.
He also once said to me, if you give somebody infinite money and an infinite time, eventually they'll end up with at least a average movie. The trick is to do it on budget and in the number of days allotted to you.
Right.
And the best expression of that was when he got together with Spielberg and they made Raiders. That was a very interesting thing that they did, challenge they put to themselves. It's because Spielberg had famously gone way over budget on his previous movies and over schedule. And George challenged him to stay on time and on budget for Raiders.
That's pretty funny. I would love to see those dinners and those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kasdan did Raiders, right?
Kasdan wrote Raiders. Yeah. Kasdan really wrote Raiders. I mean, there was a story conference and George wrote the treatment, but then Kasdan went off and just wrote the whole thing.
What is your take on Kasdan's contribution to The Empire Strikes Back? Did he sandpaper it? Or do you feel like he really put a lot into it in terms of the dialogue and pacing and that sort of thing for the storytelling?
Well, it's one of those things that's hard to quantify because
I love Kasdan. So I just, I'm a huge Kasdan fan.
Yeah, no, I love The Big Chill and everything.
Yes.
And he was helpful on both Empire and Jedi books. So I owe him a debt of gratitude. And, for Empire, what George told me was he made Yoda work in terms of the script.
Wow.
And that was no small thing to make Yoda work. And he also went through and, even if he only changed a word in a scene, in some scenes, or 10 words, those 10 words might have been really important.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And I think that is, when I watch episode 2, Attack of the Clones, it's painful because I think, there's a good movie there that just needed that Kasdan touch.
Yes.
The ideas being, everything being said is almost there. It just needed another really good polish, and you're seeing like a rough draft filmed.
That's fair. It is, like you say, painful to watch some of that dialogue in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
Like, we joke about it all the time, right, guys? We're always like...
We do.
Yeah.
I hate sand.
Yeah.
Gets everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, what would Kasdan write instead of saying, I don't like sand?
Yeah, I don't know.
Kasdan's really good at those, kind of, one-on-one moments, though. Like, that's where he really shines. And not only that, he basically is Han Solo. Like, his voice is Han Solo.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah. And I'd have to go back and look to see how he revised Han Solo stuff. But is it the hikes the hikes, frankly, the hikes deserve as much credit as Kazan, and nobody's ever talking about the hikes.
Let's talk about the hikes.
Well, I mean, they did. I did go back and look. I had the time to do like a 1-to-1. They took George's dialogue and they made it sing. They just made it sing. They made it jokes that were kind of funny. They made it really funny. In particular, I really remember how, dusting or making the jump to hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy.
Right.
They had written, if you can see this, George had written like that much dialogue to get the point across. They did it like with that much dialogue. And just with,
they were like, you need a sentence.
they just made it, they had the sense of rhythm. And George is a pretty good writer, but they were really good at dialogue. And they did some of that with American Graffiti too. So those guys, that couple really deserve, and because they helped make American Graffiti into this huge blockbuster, and then they helped make Star Wars into a huge blockbuster. They deserve huge amounts of credit.
Now, why weren't they a part of Empire and going forward with Lucasfilm projects?
I think it's because they wanted to direct.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, he wanted them to write. Yeah, it was just always the same story. I think he wanted them even to write all of Graffiti, and they were going to direct. And then I don't know what happened. I don't know if they did it or not, but they were available to do the polish. But writers often want to direct.
Yeah, that's fair. One other main part I want to get into, the whole thing with Vader and the big surprise about I'm your father, and only Kirshner and Lucas and maybe Hamill knew. Is David in your book, David Prowse, I guess Kirshner saying David Prowse tapped him on the shoulder in the theater saying like, what the hell? No one told me. Like, so learning about that story and stuff like that, what is your take on that whole situation with David Prowse not knowing and the whole secret and how that all came to be? Like, what's your after having done your research, that whole situation is very.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd have to go through the book and find when, but they knew going into it that Prowse couldn't keep a secret. They just knew. I'm not sure at what point they knew, but he'd made it clear to them. Certainly by Jedi, he'd made it really clear. And I think in general they were just keeping it secret because you wouldn't want that to get out,
Right.
And so there was no reason for David Prowse to know, and they weren't using his voice.
Right.
Why would you tell somebody, regardless of how good they were at keeping a secret, why would you tell them if they don't need to know? I think it's simple as that. Mm-hmm. But by Jedi, they were deliberately keeping him way far from any script.
He was like really upset about it, right?
Yeah, I think in general he was just upset that he wasn't getting enough credit for being Darth. Sorry, I got my throat's getting dry.
Oh, that's fine.
Thank you. I just wasn't getting enough credit as Darth Vader. Imagine how frustrating it is to be the most iconic villain of all time, and nobody knows recognizing you on the street.
Right.
Yeah, this is David Prowse right here.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Anthony Daniels had some of that too.
Yeah. Oh, he makes sure, I think, in the public eye that people know exactly who he is, though.
Yeah, now. Yeah.
He wears gold suits and everything.
Does it?
Yeah.
Looks like a game show host when he goes out now.
Oh, really?
All right, I have one more main question, and that is all the research you did, all the archiving, all the tapes. What is the one major thing that like shocked you about the making of The Empire Strikes Back, or surprised you, or awed you, that stuck with you through the whole process?
Well, two things jump to mind. The first is every ILM veteran that I talked with, Dennis Murrin, Ralph McQuarrie, they all said that Empire was the hardest film they'd ever worked on, ever. And this is many years afterwards. Because the other thing about George is not only does he like to make things up on the fly sometimes, but he's also pushing his people. Is if you can do this, I want you to do this times 10.
Oh, wow.
You know, that was a common thing. He said, if you can breathe in here, I think Roger Guillet said that. He said, well, or one of the younger guys on the prequel said, oh, you can exist in this small room. Well, can you exist in this small room without oxygen? You know, there's a kind of, pushing people to do even beyond what they think they can do. And Empire, you know, I think Star Wars had however many shots, special effects shots, visual effects shots. Empire had something like 10 times as many, and really difficult ones, you know, with the miniatures and everything. It was a massive undertaking.
Wow.
And while he was doing it, remember, ILM is just making the move up from the South. It's not like they've been there for 20 years.
Oh, okay.
ILM is being established in Northern California. So it's all, or a lot of it is new. So there's that. And just the amazing, you know, the amazing way that you can't take this for granted. The amazing way that George Lucas, with very, very little, would inspire a whole range of technicians and craftspeople and artists to do their best. People loved working for him. I loved working for him. Of course, there were some people who didn't, who got out of there as quick as they could. But the majority of people loved working him. And there's people, you know, people were there for 20 years, 30 years. He was a good person to work for. And not because he was, you know, making chit chat. There was something about him that inspired people. So that I found very interesting. And then the whole financial angle, because there were so many papers I found in the archives, I found like the documents describing when Bank of America was pulling out and you know, Bank of Boston was, and the actual dates, the checks were written and everything. So I was able to date everything to exact. That was just, in terms of storytelling, it's great to know exactly when it happened in terms of making the movie.
Sure. And
how much was really at stake. The whole company was at stake. Sequels were not surefire hits. It's easy to think that it was a surefire hit. Godfather 2 didn't make, I think it made less than half of what Godfather made. And Empire didn't. Jaws 2 was a huge disaster. Well, I think it made money, but general, and Empire didn't make as much money as Star Wars.
Right.
And it's the second act, and second acts are downer. So all of that stuff was really, really interesting. And then, of course, listening to all the Alan Arnold tapes was really fun. You know, just listening to them on the way to work.
Any takeaways from George Lucas himself and discussions you've had with him about The Empire Strikes Back that people may not know about?
Well, no, anything that was interesting was in the book.
Okay.
I remember being on the set of episode 3, though, and Rick came by and said, okay, everybody's going to leave, but you can stay. And I thought, what's happening? And then Hayden Christensen and Ian McDiarmid came up and to reshoot that scene in episode 5, where the Emperor, is saying, or Vader saying he could turn Luke, and so they're sort of updating it so it fits,
right,
with the voices and the slightly tweaked dialogue. That was really cool. That was really, so I've actually seen part of episode 5 being shot.
That's true. That's a good point.
Wow.
That's cool. That was unexpected. And it was a big secret. So there were literally just the minimum crew. There were only about 6 or 7 people on the set. And
you were like, I can.
Well, no, Rick came to say, Rick was very kind and said, he wanted me to stay and see it, which is nice of him.
That's amazing. Do you guys have any other questions about The Empire Strikes Back for JW?
No, I could just listen to this for hours.
I could too. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like one of the few Resistance broadcast episodes that I feel like I'm just listening to it, but it's live.
I don't mind.
Awesome.
We're taxing your throat. You're like, you need the water, and I feel like we're burning you out here. But I guess a couple more quick questions, if that's okay. So Alec Guinness returning. We know that it's been falsely reported over the years that he didn't like Star Wars and he didn't like being part of it, but he actually did enjoy it, and he enjoyed the money he made with the box office returns for the first one. What was his experience coming back for Empire? I know it's in the book, but your take on it for our audience, him coming, kind of coming back and doing little bits of Obi-Wan for Empire as opposed to his main role in A New Hope.
Well, I think the reason why people think he didn't enjoy it is I think he wrote that. He wrote a couple memoirs, and I think he kind of poo-pooed Star Wars in one of them, if I remember correctly. But just like anybody, you can be of two minds on the same subject. He certainly appreciated. In one of the books, I know he said, in terms of money, thank God for Star Wars, because George gave him some piece of the profits, and. But for Empire, unfortunately, he died. I would have loved to have spoken with him. He's one of my favorite actors. If Kind Hearts and Coronets, Lawrence of Arabia, just an incredible actor. I think he, did he have a cold when doing Empire? Is that the one that he had a cold, or was it Jedi that he had a cold?
I don't remember.
I can't remember either. I think he had he was just there for a day or two.
In Jedi, he has the one scene, so maybe that's the one he had the cold. Because in Empire, he's in Hoth, then he comes to him in the vision, and then he shows up on Dagobah.
Yeah, but still, they would have shot all of that.
Oh, true.
In a day or two. I really don't know what he was thinking. I think he probably just thought. I think probably George had to give him a fair chunk of change to get him to come back, or talk him into it, because it's not that exciting. He was an artist, so it's not that exciting to come back. Mm-hmm. He's coming back also to do what actors don't really like to do, which is explaining the story. They don't want to be the person explaining the story.
Oh yeah.
And he did some of that in Star Wars, but it was so beautifully written, and he had other things to do. But in Star Wars, he almost quit when he found out he didn't have a death scene. He wasn't, or first when he found out he wasn't going to the end of the movie, and then he was going to die without a death scene. He was very upset. I mean, he almost quit right after.
That's crazy.
I mean, you guys know that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's funny to think that he didn't think he had a death scene when everybody knows that is the scene where
but remember he wasn't there.
Yeah.
For that.
No,
that's just it was a special effect, so he didn't get to act. That was a special effect. He was free. And also, he didn't like coming back as a ghost because he was a Roman Catholic, and that was against his his religion as he interpreted it. George had to tell him, well, he's not a ghost. He's a I'm not sure exactly what George said, but he's a manifestation of his same personality in the Force. I don't know what George told him, but he convinced
just
him.
Just use the word ghost.
It was. You will come back. You're not playing a ghost, right?
Yeah. But that was the key piece of casting in Star Wars. Alec Guinness agreeing to do Star Wars. I mean, I've been appreciating this more as I write about other movies. It's just how sort of slightly half crazy you have to be a really good actor, to believe 100% in what you're doing with all these people looking at you, most of whom have no idea what's going on, who haven't read the script, who are being very critical of you, or saying snarky remarks as soon as they get off the set. Maybe not on this, but in the pub or wherever. Can you imagine, how did Alec Guinness accept to do this reading the shooting script of Star Wars?
Right.
I mean, what kind of crazy person of his stature would agree to do that? And it's because he saw a little bit of Tolkien and, and he liked to work or whatever. And he liked George when he met him. It's just, that was the key, without Alec Guinness, the first movie wouldn't be as good.
to kind of like tie it all together then, and it all seems to
first Alec, Guinness, and then Jar Jar later.
Yeah.
it all seems to like string together to this one thing, and that is that everyone, like, people like George Lucas. Because you say all the ILM people liked working for him, the actors liked working for him, Alec Guinness was drawn to him, and that's what made him do this ridiculous movie. Like, what is it about George Lucas, and you loved working for him, what is it about George Lucas that you think makes people not only want to work for him, but like him enough to do things out of their comfort zone or things that they think are ridiculous?
Well, that is a very good question. Once he had done a couple good movies, it's easier to say, well, people would look at this movies he'd done and the artwork that he created, in these movies and go, this is a really remarkable person. I want to work for him. But already before that, he was galvanizing the troops, so to speak, even when he made his student films, THX. And when he was just a guy who got an award standing on the set of Finian's Rainbow, right? Fred Astaire, you guys know how George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola met. Well, a series of circumstances. George just happened to be Warner Brothers on a kind of like a scholarship, and there was nothing for him to do. And he called up his friend Howard Kazanjian, who was first AD on Finian's Rainbow. And he said, I'm bored here. What should I do? He said, well, why don't you come over here? We're shooting. And so George came over and was watching them shoot. And Fred Astaire is working with Petula Clark, and Francis Ford Coppola has already won an Oscar, I believe. Yeah, I think he'd already won for Patton. So he's a fairly big presence.
Wow.
And George is standing to his side, and there was something magnetic about him that brought Coppola over to him and say, what do you think? Think of it. George goes, not much, or something like that. and Coppola says, well, if you get any ideas, let me know. And so the two of them become friends during this period. And then they go off and do The Rain Man. And George is kind of Coppola's assistant in documentary, making a behind the scenes film. I'd just like to point out about The Rain Man, which became The Rain People, I believe. Anyway, so there was something about his style. He had style, he had attitude, and there was something magnetic about his personality. And then he had very far out ideas. And he and Coppola then went off and started American Zoetrope up in San Francisco. And they were, can't underestimate what a rebellious person and maverick he was for a long, long time. And just how offbeat his ideas were. And really THX, he said to me, is probably the truest representation of his personality. Just quite strange and out there, And so I think there's just all these things, and everything he did in an interesting way. If you worked at Skywalker Ranch, it was like working in Disneyland, right? It wasn't an amusement park, but it was so beautiful. Everything about it had been done. And Marsha Lucas, of course, also should get a lot of credit for Skywalker Ranch, at least in the early days. She had a lot to do with the design and everything. But the Big Rock Ranch, which was all George, was also incredible. And the story that I always remember, which I just think was really great, is when he got the computer division together after Star Wars. He had the money to start basically doing these experiments and bankrolling what would become digital cinema. And he got Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Sargent, these very genius tech guys. And eventually John Lasseter was there, and they moved the Avid computer. And George didn't know what they were doing technically. He knew what he wanted them to do, but George is not a computer genius. These guys were computer geniuses. And they came and they showed him like an early prototype of one of the computers, and George was eating his sandwich, and there was like a ledge, and he put his sandwich down on the ledge of the computer, and he looked at it and he said, well, it can hold a tuna fish sandwich. they just loved it. Like, this is a real guy. I mean, he's not full of shit. He's not pretending to be, and he's bankrolling us, and we're doing this incredible work because he's bankrolling us.
Wow.
And so that's inspiring.
So do you think then
it's like so weird. It's like the opposite of Steve Jobs, but like just as fascinating.
It's so funny too because, well, not funny, but awesome to hear from you, because all the interviews and stuff and books that I've read from people that have worked with George have said that it was not just that he had his way of thinking and it was like his way or the highway. He also, like you said, pushed the people that worked for him to give their best work. So someone was doing visual effects and was meeting with George and was working on some type of space battle scene, and he had said he wanted a certain edit, and the person was like, oh, well, we can't do that because of something. And George looked at him and was like, we don't say can't here. Like, you're not going to tell me you can't do something. Because if you can't do it, then you shouldn't be working here. And I was like, I mean, that is bold, but like, it's true. Like, you want someone that's going to be like, I can't do it right now, but I'm going to figure it out. And it seemed like that's what those are the types of people he wanted to surround himself with, where, yeah, we can't do it now, but we're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people were I'm still so inspired by him, because it's like, he always pushed the boundaries. And if he couldn't do something, he didn't just say, okay, well, that's it. He would take the steps to make it happen on his own. Right.
That's all true. But what's also nice about, or I found very human about him too, is at a certain point, if it wasn't working, it's not like he would throw a temper tantrum.
Right.
Like some directors might. I remember once the thing wasn't working and he just walked away and he said, well, we tried.
Really?
And then he famously had CBB.
Was that the Phantom Menace?
I think around Empire, he had is when he started the CBB. Maybe it was on Star Wars, but when they watched the dailies, it's like, could be better, you know?
Oh, really?
But we will accept it, the shot. It could be better, but it's good enough. And some people would argue that he said that too early. I know some of the ILM guys would try and argue with him they could make it better, but there was a certain balancing of time and money. And so it's not like he just pushed people. He also knew when to pull back.
Right.
You know,
Right.
It's that delicate balance.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he was such an honest person when he didn't have capital to rest on, that maybe he earned respect from people in that way. When he knew he could lose everything, but he still was very honest and open about his thoughts on things. And like even him quitting the Directors Guild because he didn't put the director's credit at the beginning of the movies and stuff like that. Like he was willing to lose it all for his vision, I guess. And maybe that earned respect by other artists.
Well, I think throughout his career, he was trying, and in the beginning, Marcia Lucas, I think, was also very much on the same page with him. They wanted to create a company that was fair to people, and he wanted other people to be fair to him. And the Directors Guild, he thought, was not operating in a fair way. Lucasfilm was not his name, just like Warner Brothers, wasn't the name of the Warner. I mean, it was and it wasn't. It's the name of his company.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Marcia and George were the first. I don't know if they were the first movies company, but they certainly, to my knowledge, there weren't a lot of companies doing that. Of course, they're publicly traded, but as a private company, and they gave the employees all a percentage of the profits from Star Wars. And not only that, they said, doesn't matter if you're the CEO or the janitor. If the janitor's been here longer than the CEO, the janitor gets more money than the CEO.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that.
And afterwards it was changed, but that was the idea in the beginning. And so that's the kind of person he was. And I even during the prequels, I don't think it was money that was a problem. I think I would say even starting with Empire, as soon as he had instead of one project, in Star Wars, he had one project. That was the one thing he was working on. Once he was building a ranch, making 3 other movies at the same time, it's just a lot more to keep track of.
Right.
He started burning out. And by the time he was doing the prequel trilogies, he's got many projects going on. And already with Jedi, well, he had Jedi, of course. There was other things going on in his personal life, but I don't think it was the money that influenced him. I think it's just, he was older and didn't have quite the same fire. But I still, even in episode 2, if you can make something as good as the asteroid chase in episode 2, you're a pretty fine film director. That asteroid chase is the shots are so beautiful. And in terms of the storytelling, it's just so well done.
Yeah.
The dialogue's not so great.
Right. Sure.
But in terms of the shot design, it's just fantastic. And there's even in the prequels, I think there's moments that are really, really as good as anything he did in the original trilogy. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have anything else for you. I know we've taken a lot of your time, so I really appreciate it. I guess your final thoughts on for our audience, your personal feelings about the movie The Empire Strikes Back. I know you're really big original Star Wars and original cuts, but the movie itself, whether it's the original cut or the new editions, whatever, your personal feelings about the film itself, The Empire Strikes Back.
I think it's a great film. I mean, it's one of the all-time great films that have ever been made. It definitely is somewhere in the top 50 because it did that rare thing where it built upon something that was already fantastic and managed to carry it forward in significant ways and had wonderful characterizations, credible visual effects, incredible music. We haven't even said John Williams' name once during this whole thing.
Oh, true. Yeah.
I mean, John Williams managed to write even more great music for Star Wars after writing probably his masterpiece, right?
Right.
Oh, that was another part of your book. I'm sorry, I have to say this.
Yeah.
You said in your book, it says when George handed the drafts to Larry Kasdan to write the final draft, he said, "Listen to the score for Star Wars as you're doing this."
Oh, did he? Yeah.
And that's so amazing. Like, I love that. I just absolutely love that.
Yeah. He was a fan of John Williams' music. I remember him in episode 3 saying, "Oh, don't worry, Johnny will make this work." One of the highlights of my life was sitting there with Ben for spotting the music. When they spot the music.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to sit there with Ben Burt, John Williams, George Lucas, spotting the music for episode 3. I wasn't there for the whole thing, but I was there for maybe an hour. And it was just, afterwards you have to pinch yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Unreal.
And,
wow.
So, great music. It's just, and that what Empire is what all the great movies are. It's just, and what I love about film is that it brings together so many disciplines, so many great artists and craftspeople who are at the top of their trade. And there's so many little decisions that are made that can make or break the movie that we're not even aware of. And when it all goes right, it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And the whole thing is like a piece of music. It's like a 2-hour piece of music. It's not like reading a book, which is a different experience, as you guys know. It's it's like listening to a piece of music because it controls the pacing and it controls exactly what you see and hear. And that's why you can, and when it works, that's why people have seen the movie 100 times or 200 times. Some people, it just works. So
well, I think we have to end on that note. So yeah, if you guys out there haven't checked out JW's books yet, The Making of Star Wars, Making of The Empire Strikes Back, Making of Return of the Jedi, Indiana Jones, Alien, and then once again your new novel coming up. What was it, June or July?
July 14th, Bastille Day in France.
July 14th, Bastille Day, available for pre-order. It is called All Up, so check it out. And you have a website too, right?
I have a website. It's on the website. Yep. And everything.
What's the website?
Just jwrinzler.com.
Okay.
Nice.
And then do you have anything else you'd like to plug or tell people about?
Nope, that'll do it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I want to say on behalf of me, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about this. And we'll obviously have to have you back for more stories about other Star Wars movies and stuff like that. James and Lacey, anything you want to say to JW before we get out of here?
Thank you so much, man. I've enjoyed everything about this.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah, this has
Thanks.
been super fun. I love George, so anything I hear about George, I'm like super excited.
Well, I love him too, and I think it was his birthday the other day. Or today, isn't today his birthday?
As we're recording this,
As
it's his
we're recording
birthday.
this, yes.
76.
Yeah.
Happy birthday,
Yeah.
George.
Is he 76 now? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible.
So go call
so
him.
happy.
Next year he'll be 77.
Yeah,
is-
there you go.
Right. So happy birth. Let's all say happy birthday to him. Yeah.
Happy birthday, George.
Happy birthday,
Lucas.
George.
Happy birthday.
All right.
Thank you, JW.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for having me back. I look forward to the next time.
Yes.
Yes.
So there you have it. JW Rinzler. We talked him to the ground. He needed to get some water. Needed to clean his thoughts out, and but it was unbelievable. He spent so much time with us, and we appreciate him taking the time to do that. Talking about Empire Strikes Back, I know I can go for a long time talking about that movie, hours. We could have kept him on for hours talking about that movie, at least from my perspective. But that's it. We are here celebrating Empire Strikes Back, and we're going to keep that rolling right now. So thank you again to JW Rinzler for taking the time to do that. But we're going to send it to Lacey to keep this theme going in the Patreon pod race. Lacey?
All right, guys, it's time for the Patreon pod race. So there's a lot of different ways that you can support us. You can like this video, subscribe, comment below, please, letting us know what you think about Empire Strikes Back. And then also follow us on Twitter at RBATSWNN. Or if you want even more content and more access with us, you can head over to patreon.com/resistance broadcast. We have all different tiers that give you exclusive content, from mini episodes, which we have more than 8 a month. We have Q&As, polls, all different types of stuff. So our generals get to be a part of the show. They're our highest tier, and this is their chance. So we ask them a question, and then they get to answer that question in 60 seconds or less, and then we react to it. Before I get to that, we just want to thank those generals. So thank you, Carmelo, Andrew Staley, Jeremy Myers, Neel Shah, David Probus, John Risi, Micah Harrison, Tampa Movie Guy, Michael Gaines, Jetta Rosewater, Beer Fett, and Val Tichkov. I love that I have to thank Beer Fett. So great.
Beer Fett.
So this week we're actually hearing from General John Risi, and we asked him, what is your favorite moment or scene from The Empire Strikes Back, and why? So John, take it away.
Hello, TRB community. This is General Beard, John Risi. I'm here to tell you about the best moments from The Empire Strikes Back. It has to be Yoda and Luke training on Dagobah, specifically when Yoda has all of his quotes about luminous beings. We are questioning Luke on his belief, and that is why you fail. Judge me by my size, do you? A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never attack. He succinctly explains the Force, and I think a lot of people forget about how the Force should be looked at, especially with the newer movies, and everybody sometimes getting up in a hoopla and arguing about things. It's really quite simple, and it boils down to belief and using it for good. Even though I do lean Empire, and Vader and Palpatine are my favorite characters overall, that is the best part from Empire. Signing off.
All right, John. First of all, you are all decked out with the Episode 9 hat, the Ahsoka Tano jacket. You've got all the stuff. So John, our John, what did you think of his answer?
That's Yoda. No, I loved it. I like. I don't know. There's something. It's so simple and just loved about, like, universally loved is something I think of when I think of Yoda, and his wisdoms and those quotes, and it's just fun. So funny. JW Rinzler talking about the biggest contribution Larry Kasdan made was making Yoda work. And there we have John Risi talking about how all those lines stuck with him. So it's just like,
Yeah.
that's the proof in the pudding right there, right? And I know you love the bad guys. I know you love Vader. I know you love Palpatine. But the fact that Yoda and those quotes about the Force, and really, like you put it well, John, General Beard, how simple it really is, and choosing to be good and treating and respecting the Force the right way, and Yoda kind of trying to hammer that home to Luke. So I thought that was a great answer. My quote to sign off all my articles is in my allies, for my allies the Force, and a powerful ally it is. So just well done. And like as always, John, you're a great fan. I'm glad you get to do these pod races from time to time. Thanks for always supporting us and always shouting us out on your own, and just telling people to subscribe to us and join the Patreon and everything. You're such a good Star Wars fan, and I see you do that for a lot of other people too. So I'm glad you get to have some time here so people can see what you're all about. And thanks for being awesome.
James?
Yep, good pod race. I totally agree. I think Yoda, to me, in a lot of ways, is like a big, huge takeaway from The Empire Strikes Back. I think Taika Waititi said it a couple episodes ago of the gallery. One of the things that really stuck with him is that specific line, and it's always been the one for me too. Is when Luke comes out, or when the X-Wing comes out, and he says, "I don't believe it," and that is why you fail. And it's so funny because, like, what is that, like 8 total words or 10, less than 10 words between two characters, and it just so perfectly encapsulates so much of what we understand about confidence and faith and being willpower. It's so good, and I'm really glad that stuck out to you too. So good answer, and thanks for doing the pod race for us.
John, this is hands down one of the best answers, because Yoda, I think, is the best part of Empire Strikes Back. I grew up with the Muppets. I love that I love puppetry, stuff like that. So when I grew up watching Star Wars and Yoda shows up, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a puppet, and it's amazing. And it just shows how great the movie is, because they made a puppet seem so alive and part of the world in a way that you never second guessed it. You never thought, oh, there's a guy down there being like this. So I totally agree with you. Thanks for being an awesome fan. Thanks for doing this for us. We really appreciate it. You came in the clutch, and we appreciate everything you do for us and all other types of fans. And thanks for just loving Star Wars with us. So now we're going to head over to me, and we're going to do Resistance Transmissions. Lacey? Thanks, Lacey. It's time for Resistance Transmissions.
And I'm the cheesy one.
Thanks, Lacey. No. All right, guys, it's time for Resistance Transmissions. You know how this works. Every week, John puts up a crazy, wacky situation, and you guys give your answers. I can already kind of glance over on my notes, and I see that it's not a wacky situation. But I had to include that because I know some of you guys like when I say that, so I left it in there for you. You're welcome.
Good.
All right. So the scenario this week, kind of going off our whole episode, is what is your favorite moment from The Empire Strikes Back? So this is like a warm, wholesome, fun one.
Yeah.
And John's pointing at his poster. That one.
That's
movie.
his favorite most is the poster.
Oh. You looked very angry when you were pointing at your poster. That's what caught me off guard. You looked like really mad. I was like, what?
Well, it's the second act. It's when everything falls apart. You got to be like...
Got it. All right. So first up is Todd C. at C. Bauthjurus. Jorus. That was an interesting name.
Chaos? No. Oh, no. C. Oh, I thought there was an H.
No, I just can't read.
Todd,
Anyway.
what you have to explain your handle.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Okay. He said, I truly feel this film is a masterpiece. Not one bad scene. If I had to pick a favorite, it would be the I am your father reveal, because it's one of the most iconic scenes in movie history, and it's one of the most quoted and misquoted lines ever. I still tear up a little when this moment happens.
I get chills every time it happens.
Really?
Yep.
Next is Patrick Covey at Gannon136.
He's back, baby!
And Patrick said, the end of the film where you realize the Force allows people to communicate through it, and you realize that Force FaceTime was in front of your face for 4 decades.
Good point, Pat.
Wow. Yeah.
Next is Todd De Grossier at Todd Knows Best. And Todd says, for me, it has to be seeing Boba Fett and all the other bounty hunters for the first time. I remember immediately thinking how cool they looked, and I wanted to know everything about them.
Nice.
Big surprise.
Yeah.
I have to say, though,
surprise.
I appreciate this answer because everybody has that one thing that they really, really love. And of course, there's always something that everyone's like, oh, everyone loves this moment. But everybody has that one weird thing that they're like, that one head nod really, really stuck out to me. Or like that one character in the back doing this one thing. I just love it.
For this scene, it's always Bosk's toes hanging over the edge.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Kenny Crawley Jr. at Kenny Crawley. Hey, Kenny.
Kenny got his handle. So
yes, he did.
Yeah.
He said Yoda lifting Luke's X-Wing. The scene, the musical score by John Williams, is just breathtaking. John Williams made Star Wars. Like, he definitely did. Next is CMP at S-Stage Photo Gal. And CMP said, when Han and Leia kiss for the first time, love this. He's a scoundrel.
And then it was interrupted.
Yeah.
All I'm thinking about is Force Awakens, where he's like, oh, look, here I am. And you're like,
Again, yeah.
All right. Next is Deepa Banana, who said...
Depa Banana is, I think it's a Depa Balaba joke.
Oh, Depa Banana.
It might be.
Said this scene, I love Yoda saying, only what you take with you. Violence begets, is that how you say that? Begets violence?
It is.
Violence begets violence.
It's also an introspective look into Luke's darkness and fears that the dark side could manifest to him. This is a great answer.
That is a good answer.
This is a deep answer. Love that. From a banana.
Yeah. And I'm gonna save all these thoughts for the Patreon commentary that we're doing for.
I'm sorry, it's just so funny that deep answer came from a banana handle.
Right.
Yeah, and it reminds me kind of what I was saying before. Is like, what is that? 10 words between 2 characters or something? Like only what you take with you. Right. 6 words, and it just so fully encapsulates like.
It's
you are what you put out, and it's just it's so crazy.
It's funny you say that too, because J.W. Rinzler brought that up about Lawrence Kasdan. Like you'd see him add like 1 or 2 or maybe 10 words.
Yeah.
I thought, even though it was a deep answer from Deepa Banana, I thought it was very appealing.
Serially?
Serially?
Don't.
That's a combination of seriously and really, and my brain just died. Like
I thought it was just because you put bananas in cereal.
No,
Serially?
I hate bananas.
Sorry.
That's what that was. It was me going serious and really at the same time, and my mouth came up with that. But John, everyone go back, replay the episode. About 20 seconds from now, you'll see John come up with this joke, and just wait for it. And my favorite comment from the last episode was when someone was like, I saw the look on John's face. I saw him write it down. I saw him.
Yeah.
You busted.
To be fair.
All right, let's move on. Yeah. Let's move on. We're getting slipped up here.
Okay. All right. Oh, I hate you.
Oh.
I thought you were just being really rude. I was like, all right,
I thought he was being rude too, so I immediately looked back at my notes.
And then
I'm sitting here watching the two of you like processing.
You know what it was? It was like Mario Kart, where you get on the banana peel and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like that's what just happened.
James is going through his joke list. He's like, we have to Chiquita that one off. There we go.
John. Any more? You want to get him out?
Nah.
Yeah, can we hit the 2-hour episode?
Right.
Okay.
We're getting there.
Next is Do Droids Dream of Electric Bantha?
Wow.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
At IML Diabolito?
Diablito.
Oh.
That means I am the little devil, I think.
Yeah. That's interesting. They said, so many to choose from, but I love Luke taking down an AT-AT during the Battle of Hoth.
That is
Nice.
pretty BA.
Next is Glenn Johnson
NA.
at Hazy Big and said, quote, that's right, and my friends out in it. The original trilogy was full of these, quote, my friend is in danger and no matter what I need to save them moments. This scene is the best out of all of them. Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, Han was very...
It ties in a lot to the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Han was very cowboy in that. He's like, I'll see you in hell. Like, you know?
Yeah.
You do love that line.
Yeah.
Next is Joey Sack at Joey Sack. Hi, Joey. He said, when Yoda reveals who he really is, the way Yoda goes from from strange old hermit to wise Jedi master in the blink of an eye is so well done.
Yeah. Without a
Judge me
doubt.
by my size, do you?
Wow.
What? What are you saying wow about?
The quote.
Oh.
The change.
True.
The reveal.
Jeff P. Skywalker at R.I.P. Burt Convy said, quote, I'd just as soon kiss a Wookiee. I can arrange that. You could use a good kiss.
Yeah.
I love their relationship.
That's Kazdan again, making that humor work.
Yeah, I love how feisty. And it's funny that, well, it's not funny. It's obviously on purpose, but Kazdan wrote that. And then you see the relationship between like Indiana Jones and stuff. And you're like, this is like Han and Leia's relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, I just watched Indiana Jones in the past year, so I can now get these references.
So the movie is pretty ripe still in your mind.
John.
Go for that 2-hour podcast, baby!
Let me get through this. Okay. Next is FN2187 at Mike _8420. And Mike said, I'm assuming your name is Mike. Mike said, I love how Vader is so quick to choke out anyone who makes a mistake. LOL. That is a prime LOL. He was not messing around trying to find Skywalker. No, he was not.
Yes.
And last
I think his name is Mike.
Mike,
I think it's the only name they ever gave him.
Mike's a commander, I think. He's a commander.
he is.
And he's a big make Solo 2 happen. So get after it on Monday.
Just throwing that in there.
Yeah.
Makes one do happen.
Yeah.
All right. And last but not least is Alex Zukas.
Another commander.
At Zubaka. I love this handle. Zubaka. He said, I love the fight between Vader and Luke on Bespin. The first line spoken by Vader gives me chills every time. The Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet.
Yes.
Nice. That's John's favorite scene.
That's why I put it
I only know
last.
that because he brings it up like all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an Empire Strikes Back episode. So, you know.
Guys, thank you so much. If you want to be on the show, make sure to follow us on Twitter at RBATSWNN. And John usually puts up a crazy, wacky situation, but sometimes he changes it up like this week and does something really nice and wholesome and wonderful. Except for the banana bits. I'll leave those behind.
Banana Bits, my favorite cereal.
Yeah.
No. Trash that.
All right.
Back to you, John.
Okay. Listen. I want to remind everyone out there that Make Solo 2 Happen Day is in 4 days.
It's Monday.
4 days on Monday, the 25th. How you get involved is simple. If you're on social media, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever, Reddit, I don't care. Use hashtag Make Solo 2 Happen early, often, all day. Take a photo of you with your Make Solo 2 Happen shirt. If you don't have one of those, any kind of Star Wars, Solo gear, Chewie stuff. Wow, you watching
Toys.
the movie, anything.
Yeah.
Just tweet away, Facebook away, Instagram away. We're going to share everything. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be insane. And we just, it's an amazing time. Last year, we didn't expect it to be as big as it was, and we see the passion growing for more solo, and we are just hoping for a great day. So get involved, and if you have any questions, hit us up. You can email us at resistancebroadcast@gmail.com or Twitter at RBATSWNN. But more importantly, for the long haul, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, everywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe, because we're putting out a lot of content, including the Mando fan show, which you'll see tomorrow. Make sure you're going to StarWarsNewsNet.com every day for your latest Star Wars news, reviews, editorials, information, and more. You guys can find me on Twitter at Johnny Hoey and writing and editing over StarWarsNewsNet.com. James?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Myra Trunks, and also trying to fix my Galaxy's Edge saber. Do you guys see that? I don't know.
Yeah.
It turns from purple to red and then back to purple. It's very confusing. But of course, nowadays I think it's going to go from green to yellow to brown. Well, I don't know.
It's another banana joke.
I knew that was coming. I was sitting here going, how is he going to work a banana into this? Oh, gosh. Please don't talk about bananas anymore.
Okay.
They're not always the pick of the bunch, you know.
Stop. Jeez. Guys, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Lacey Gilleran, not talking about bananas, but having really a lot of fun about Star Wars.
So we thank you once again to J.W. Rinzler for joining us. He will definitely be coming back. We could have went on, just like with a lot of our interviews, we could have gone on, and it was a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed this long episode. We know it was a little long, and if you're still with us now, you're diehard TRB.
This is the longest episode we've ever done.
So we're going to tell you a secret.
I think that could be true.
Since you've been with us so long, here's a little secret. We're going to be back Monday with another episode. So enjoy your weekends and get ready for Make Solo 2 Happen Day, because Monday's episode is going to be all about Make Solo 2 Happen, and we'll see you then right here on the Resistance broadcast. See you around, kids.